see you guys. David, Dave, Mark, I see you there. Good to see you, sir. Who else is on the call?
Yeah, I apologize. I couldn't be there in person. I planned on it, but we had a board meeting that went long. And I think my friends at the San Antonio River Authority will understand this. I've got Sunset Review Commission staff in my office today.
Oh, man.
They're good people. I like them.
Well, good to see you, sir. We have a few folks here in office, and I think it's about 2 o'clock. We have a lot of work to cover today. We have some good information. Hopefully you've had a chance to look over some of the material that was emailed to you. And I was just told that some of that material has changed. So Ron is going to go through and explain to us what those changes are and why. So we have a full agenda today. And we're going to start here any minute now with roll call. Kendall, can I give that to you?
Yes, sir. We'll start with Brian Yanta. Dave Wegman.
Present.
Thank you. Derek Bays.
Here.
Thank you. Doris Cooksey. Debbie Reed.
Here.
Thank you. Nefi Garza.
Here.
Kara Tackett.
Here.
Thank you. Jeffrey Carroll. John Beasley. Suzanne Scott.
Here.
Thank you. Steve Gonzalez. Dave Mock. I see you. Here. And Steve Klaus. Here. Thank you. And Brian Yanta, I see that you logged on as well. All right, Chair, we do have a quorum.
Thank you, Kendall. Move on to agenda item 3, the approval of the minutes from the previous San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group meeting. I trust.
Chair, I'd like to say that there are no public comments.
Oh, thank you. I just totally skipped item number 2. These glasses don't work. These glasses don't work. I need some new ones. Thank you,
Kendall does that to me every day, so don't feel bad.
That's pretty smooth there. That's pretty smooth. For those of you online, I actually jumped I went from item 1 to item 3. So thank you, Kendall, for that recovery there, to helping me there. Now going to item number 3, which is approval of the minutes from the previous San Antonio Regional Flood Planning Group meeting. I trust those meeting minutes were included with the agenda that was emailed to you. Yes, they were. Yes. Let me ask for a motion for approval.
So moved.
Can I get a second? Thank you, Mr. Klaus. Any questions or any comments on those agenda meetings? Any discussion on those meeting minutes? Hearing none, let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes. Move on to item number 4, which is a communication from the Texas Water Development Board. Anita, is Anita on the call?
Yes, hello everyone. So I just have a few. Just a reminder to submit your executed subcontract amendment and other required info. We sent out an email March 16th regarding that, and if you have any questions, let me know. Second, we sent out our latest newsletter in June. Has a lot of interesting and informative things on there, such as no negative effects, the draft plan process and the 60-day comment period, potential FMP sponsors. So definitely encourage you to read that one and the one that we sent before that in March. If you all need another copy of it, just let me know. And we also wanted to draw attention to the recent email we sent out about draft regional flood plan submission requirements, and also about the travel rate increase. And that's all I have, Chair.
Is there any questions from the committee for Anita? Hearing none. Thank you, Anita. Thanks for that update. Please stick around if you can, because we may have some questions for you as we move along in the agenda today. Thank you, Anita.
I'll be here the whole time. Just let me know.
All right, thank you. Moving on to agenda item 5, which is a chair report. After last meeting's chair report, I don't have any anymore. Just to let you know that today's agenda, obviously, we're going to be reviewing and approving chapters 1 through 4 for the August 1st deliverables. So we're going to spend the majority of our time discussing that information, as well as some of the tables and information that Ron has for us. So that's all I have. So let's move on to agenda item 6, which is an update from the various subcommittees. And I was lucky enough to walk in right as the outreach committee was wrapping up. So Suzanne?
Yes. So we are preparing for the outreach associated with the release of the draft report that will be released on August the 1st. As we talked about last time, the city of Leon Valley wanted to host a meeting for, just public input into the plan. And we didn't do a meeting in Leon Valley prior to the draft. So we have now scheduled one in Leon Valley for August the 17th. And we want to make a distinction here between these meetings, because if y'all read some of the correspondence that came out regarding the public input, the official public comment. So the draft report comes out on August the 1st. There's going to be a 60-day comment period, but we can't have the official public comment meeting until after the report has been posted for 30 days. So with that in mind, we can still do outreach meetings prior to that 30-day, official public comment. So we have worked our schedule kind of around that. So we wanted to go ahead and do the Leon Valley meeting because they've asked for it. They're already trying to coordinate that. So we will still do the meeting on August the 17th in conjunction with the city of Leon Valley. And we will do a report on the draft plan because it'll be out by then. Then we were going to have a San Antonio meeting that same week, but we're going to move that to later, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. And then we're going to do a Goliad public outreach meeting on August the 23rd. Again, talking about the plan. It'll be a good opportunity to do outreach into the lower basin again. Their comments still count to the public comment that we would receive. But then we need to have the official public comment meeting. So we went and had a little bit of conversation about this at our committee meeting. So the choices really are, we do the public comment meeting in conjunction with with a meeting of the regional planning group. We could do it at the same time, or we could just do it a separate meeting. The pros and cons of doing it with the public, with our Region 12 meeting, is that if we make it as part of the agenda for a Region 12 meeting, that means everybody on Region 12 needs to stay for the entire time, because you have to have a quorum to adjourn the meeting. Otherwise, we could do it on the same day of the Region 12 meeting, and we just adjourn the Region 12 meeting, and then we reconvene later that evening or whenever and have the public meeting, and that would count as the public comment meeting. And I don't think you can have a quorum of the committee members there. Or we can do another meeting within that same general time period, just to count for the 30-day after the 30 days. So what we left it at is we have not scheduled a September meeting thus far of this group. So we need to figure out when that meeting can take place of this group, and then we can just adjust our schedule accordingly for the public comment, the official public comment meeting that we would have to have. So we're gonna wait to see when that's going to be, depending on when we schedule this meeting of the Region 12 group. But I think that we came to the conclusion in the recommendation that we're going to separate the meetings. We're going to do Region 12 and then a public comment meeting may be on the same day or pretty close proximity, but this way you don't have to have a quorum of the committee there. Now, as far as outreach goes, the consultants are going to be working on doing a lot of outreach, trying to get people to attend these meetings. And the ones that we're going to have both in Leon Valley, the Goliad meeting, and then ultimately the San Antonio meeting, we are going to try to get some news stories around it as well. And they're working on that in addition to social media outreach, talking to elected officials, all the same things that we've done before. Then we're also going to make available a virtual presentation on the actual website, and still draw people there that maybe won't be able to come to a public meeting, but want to see Ron's smiling face on a PowerPoint presentation recorded, and we can still accept comments on the website as well. So we're trying to do the best that we can with trying to get as much input as we possibly can, official public comment as well as just general outreach. I think I covered everything.
Very good. Any questions from the committee, from the overall committee, for Suzanne? Well, thank you, Suzanne, for that work, and everybody else that's on the committee. Thank you. I have a note here that the technical committee did not meet. So
Correct. Nothing to report.
okay. So having reviewed those two subcommittees, let's move on to agenda item number 7, which is discussion and appropriate action on chapters 1 through 4. And I'm going to turn the time over to Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I hope y'all had fun reading the few pages that we provided. But before we get into those, I wanted to step back a little bit. We received a little more information from the Water Development Board after our last meeting on kind of about the public comment and how that was really going to go, and how actually the submittal process and what we could have changed between draft and final. So I kind of misspoke on the process a little bit, and it scared me a little bit at first, Debbie, but I took a sigh of relief once we got it all ironed out. So between draft and final, it has to be a public comment outside of minor editing. So I can get in there, and if I misspelled something or want to make something sound better, we can do that. I don't need public comment for that. But anything else any changes that gets made to anything between draft and final has to come public comment, which includes projects, evaluations, and strategies, which I told you before we can make updates to. However, there is an amendment period. That amendment period is in July. And that's kind of what July of next year. And that amendment period is kind of what all the additional funds that we've been talking about, what Anita just discussed. So that is kind of what we had talked about. That is where we'll use that information to make FMEs, FMPs, and of that nature and to go. So while we may not unless there's a public comment for a reason or something, we won't be changing the FME, FMP, FMS table. However, there will be an amendment period that we can change all of those and update it and do everything we need to for the projects, the strategies, and valuations. So, yes, ma'am.
So, Ron, to be clear, what you say, to make a change needs to be public comment. It needs to be a change in response to a public comment. Not to make a change, you have to have a public comment period. Is that gibberish?
Yeah, so.
No, but I mean, if Joe Citizen submits, hey, here's a new project, or hey, I disagree with X, Y, and Z, we can make a change to address the comment someone submitted. But other than that, or a typo clerical, we can't make changes.
You could make the public comment. You are part of the public still.
Okay.
So it's you're part of the public. You could make the public comment. So probably wouldn't do it out of the technical committee, but or something of that nature. And I think and that mainly applies to that FMX list, right? We can't add because I guess it's the kind of the transparency of everything. They don't want us to provide a draft and then we do a switcheroo, right? And change completely. So it's for transparency. I completely understand the process. But for the project standpoint, the FMXs, it would have to be a public comment. If anything, any of the major stuff would have to be a public comment.
So Ron, if memory serves me correct, one of the reasons why we engaged in this discussion last time is that there was a discussion about if a certain project is, if one of the FMXs is a study level, and then it turns out, or I'm sorry, the opposite, that we categorize as a project. But then we determine, you know what, we probably don't have enough data. We probably need to do a study first to get it. At my understanding, if memory serves me correct, we were thinking, oh yeah, changing that bucket, whether it's a study or a project, we have time for that. We can adjust those buckets. But from what you're saying, if we have a study that we determine, no, it needs to be a study, not a project, that change in bucket will require us to have a public meeting to let the public know. No.
It'll have to have a public comment, a written comment to say, hey, we have this piece of information.
Yeah, that's what I was asking. No,
Oh,
basically
okay,
the answer
got it.
is no, you can't make changes once we issue the draft report
Right.
unless it is to resolve a comment a citizen
Unless
submits.
it's a response to that comment.
Correct. Yes.
Or this committee, right?
As a citizen.
Yes.
So that would mean that we would want to have our September meeting after for sure, after the 30th. We wouldn't have it in August. We want to have our public comment meeting, us. If we want to comment, we can comment in our Region 12 meeting, and that would be considered public comment? Or does it have to be at the public comment meeting officially?
I hear it has to be you as Joe Citizen, Suzanne Scott submits a comment, not you, Suzanne Scott, committee member submits a comment.
Okay, so the committee would not have the opportunity to make any changes after the 30-day period, the committee.
I hear
I
after,
can individually.
wait,
I
we
mean,
can't even
I'm
after
sorry,
August.
after August 1st.
Right, after August 1st is what I hear.
But I could come to the public meeting and make a comment.
So we're going to be collecting that is correct, right? So as soon as August 1st rolls around, we can start collecting comments. We just can't have an official public comment meeting until 30 days afterward. But Suzanne Scott can provide me comments September 2nd.
I think, Ron, I'll speak for myself. I haven't read all this because I couldn't get a file to open on an airplane and, it's vacation time. But what we all need to understand is we as a group cannot collectively propose changes after August 1st. We can come in as individuals, but what we approve here as a group by October 1st is it.
But I guess
August 1st, sorry.
I
There's
guess
an
I just
amendment.
don't understand why, if we proposed a change in a public forum, just like we're in right now, how that is any different than a member of the public submitting a comment. Those are the same thing. We're not talking about transparency. It's about as transparent as you can get.
Anita, can you clarify that? Can you provide any insight
Anita
for
or
me on that?
James?
Yeah, so I have James looking into it right now. From my understanding, what NEFI is recommending as far as dropping an FMP down to an FMS or an FME is considered a substantive change, which shouldn't happen during this period, the 60-day period. That's something we would recommend waiting until we do the amendment to the plan later, that we could add that in. But he's double checking to see. But when we went over this, that's what my understanding was. So any changes made from public comment should not be a substantive change to what's already been published in the draft plan.
But then why is the public
And
submitting a comment? If it's
I'm
not,
sorry, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, James.
Yes,
is trying
James,
to-
we hear you.
Okay, sorry. This is James Bronikowski at the Water Development Board. And just to, I guess, clarify what Anita is saying there, it's an or thing. So I think what y'all were, I believe what was initially said early on about the only changes that can be made that aren't a result of a public comment are non-substantial changes. So any non-substantial changes, if it doesn't affect the listing of FMPs or FMSs or FMEs, if it's grammar or something that's to help fix formatting or anything non-substantial, can be made with or without a public comment. Public comments, if they are received, yes, substantive changes can be made if they are to fix an error or to make some change noted, to fix some error noted by the public. And yes, voting members of this group are considered can submit comments in their capacity as members of the public.
Okay, so to clarify that then, is a substantial, if a citizen, whether they be a member of this committee or a citizen, ask for another project, an FMX of some sort, to be considered, could that be considered public comment that would have to be considered before the final document?
A public comment, yes, could be, someone could make a public comment stating that essentially, and maybe there's an area of the map that was not included in the flood hazard extent, or perhaps an a potential project that they would like to. If there's a direct public comment, yes, but I think what the intention here, what Anita was getting to was that this is not intended to be a large changes. I think someone mentioned earlier, we're trying to ensure there's a lot of transparency here in terms of what the public sees in the draft plan is what they're able to comment on. And so that it's not intended to be a time to include, just include projects that have been realized or developed in the meantime. As mentioned earlier, that's the intent of the amended portion of the amended plan that will be due next July. However, if there are public comments received that do involve the inclusion of specific projects or changes to the data related to specific projects or flood extent maps or et cetera, those can be acted upon by the group.
Thank you for that clarification. Any other comment or concern? I see a lot of.
Just want to clarify, did we get an answer to your question about changing buckets? Can we do that?
Yes. Yes, that's considered a significant change. Yeah.
And I'll elaborate on that. Sorry, I'd just like to elaborate on that specific comment as well, question as well. Yes, that can, as the chair says, yes, that can happen. And just want to remind everyone that yes, during this public comment period, that the Water Development Board will also be performing a technical review of these draft regional flood plans. And if through the course of that review, we notice that for say something listed as a project doesn't have we feel has the sufficient data to meet those requirements, that could easily be a comment that we have in order to make a recommended change in the plan. And so, yes, a similar comment from the public is also acceptable.
Yes, that makes sense. Any other questions from our committee? Thank you for that clarification. Any other comments or clarifying questions from this committee? Okay. Hearing none. Ron? By the way, let the record show that Mr. Steven Gonzalez arrived late, but he's here.
Always got your back there. We got the clarification. I just wanted the group to be aware because I kind of misspoke last time, and I just wanted to make sure that we were all on the same page. It scared me a little bit at first, but we can make change because I was worried about the as you pointed out, the FMX list and being able to change that. But we will have the ability in the amendment, and that's going to be our goal, is to, make sure that we have some time on that. So as far as this goes, as far as the chapters that were these 1 through 4 and 5 through 10 that we're going to be producing, you heard James say that we can provide grammatical edits and things. So one of the hardest things we've done so far is all of this is we're putting these chapters together individually as we bring them to you. Once we have them collectively, I'm just so you know the process, and I'll be open with you. I'm going to provide that to our national technical writing group, and have them make sure that the voice is all the same. Everything is that we clean it up as far as how we do everything throughout the chapters, and we're consistent, and everything sounds good. So rest assured that we will make sure that all of the our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed as we go through that. So really and truly, as you look through these, the bigger concern to me is to make sure that you are comfortable with the content that we're providing. How we say it, we can always edit that. As you heard James say, we don't need public comment for that. So, but to put in another big portion of significant data, we might need that. So just wanted to make that comment before we went through everything.
So Ron, I know there's not a lot of time left between now and August 1st, and you guys are going to be up against the gun on those revisions. Is there going to be an amount of time, even if it's short, where we as the group here is the compiled entire final version for one last, go through? Or is that not even going to be possible with the timeline we have? No, is what I'm guessing.
I'm processing that in my head. So next, just kind of so we can talk logistics. Chapters 5 through 10, you will have on Monday next week, on the 18th.
For Tuesday's meeting?
For us to discuss on the technical meeting is on Tuesday, yes. And if I can get you that's when I have to have them. That's when I have to have them posted for the meeting, for the planning group meeting. And so as I get those rolled out, as we get those rolled out, we'll get them to you earlier. But that is how they're gonna. We'll have them so we can go through them individually. And I have the chapter 6 through 10. Are less substantive than chapters like 1 and 2, and they're more direct on the things that I would need y'all to look at. And probably a lot of those, we would have those discussions in that technical committees. I feel comfortable that you won't need a lot of study ahead of those chapters, maybe chapter 5, but other than that, I think those chapters are pretty straightforward. It's just kind of plugging in the information, and so us going through that information is probably what we're going to have to do in that technical meeting anyway. So yeah, we're up against the gun. We're running out of time. We're doing everything we can to get it. So that's provided Monday. We have our meeting on Tuesday, and then once we get those comments, we should have a pretty clean draft, hopefully by the end of that week, of the approved chapters 1 through 4, plus the technical committee comments addressed by the end of the week. And because we have our planning group meeting on that Monday. And so, yeah.
To clarify, the materials for the technical committee next week will be available tomorrow. The materials coming out on Monday will be for the planning group.
Yes, Suzanne's question is, what's the difference, Kendall?
There's going to be holes in what's tomorrow.
Holes as in missing tables? Or...
Because I'm going to need your input. That filled in. Well, some of those. So we're working through some of those things, getting all the information.
So for the technical committee, the structure and a lot of the information will be there, but there will be holes there's going to be tables missing or exhibits that may be missing.
Mostly the exhibits, all the exhibits will be there. It'll be some tables and some information that probably wouldn't be ready because we're going to have to go through those. An example is the recommendations on for the legislative recommendations. We haven't had a meeting with the technical committee to talk about what legislative recommendations that we're going to recommend. So
I guess what I'm trying to get at, Ron, is that if we send out this information, is there a need for the technical committee to meet to give you input? Because if there isn't, then why are they meeting?
Yes, absolutely. We have to have that technical committee meeting.
And my further question is, so technical committee information will be available Friday, tomorrow, and then there will be a new set of information Monday, or is that basically the same information? So like,
It's going to be the same information.
okay,
So why not just send it all out on Friday unless you're working the weekend?
well, I guess the answer is the posting for the full committee is due Monday, so that'll be Monday. The posting for technical is Friday, so that'll be Friday. But for us, the importance is I want to know if I read it this weekend, it's not different than what I get Monday.
Yeah, same question.
Kendall,
Okay, the technical committee agenda packet needs to be posted tomorrow. So the materials that the technical committee will need for Tuesday will be available tomorrow. The planning group information needs to be provided by next week, Friday. So there is time for the technical committee to provide its comments if it's going to be added into the agenda packet for the planning group. Now, the technical committee may not be tackling all of chapters 5 through 10 on Tuesday, or will they?
well, anything we
As
need,
far as we get.
anything we need from them, we will be tackling.
Okay, there is the option of addressing chapters 5 through 10, but not all chapters may be addressed.
And
So
what I hear, Kendall, is there will not be a new posting Monday next week of information. It won't be till
I misspoke.
this Friday and next Friday.
yes.
No,
the
that's
agen-
okay. I'm just
No,
making sure, we're making sure we all understand.
No, I misspoke. I get my Mondays. Yeah,
No, we get it.
my dates are running together in my head. So thank you,
Monday, I have
Kendall.
to post the agenda. That's what he was thinking.
Okay,
So-
but not the information.
Yes.
Okay.
Clear?
For the 0 public citizens who have ever participated in this meeting.
We've had people present, come and comment.
So with that, you've had chapters 1 through 4 provided. I was going to get so chapter 1 is our area description, a lot of data through it. And you saw most of the information in the technical memo. All of this information is just the data gathering of what all we have through that chapter.
Hey, Ron, a couple of clerical and non-substantive issues on chapter 1.
Yep.
On page 1, you use the acronym SAFPR, which is for the flood planning region. It's not defined prior to the use of the acronym. It is defined on page 3, but that's a little late. On your voting members, 2 of your voting members come from different organizations now. On page 5, your listing of municipalities in the flood planning region. On the 3rd column, there's a city of nothing. It's just empty. And then on your footnotes on page 7, those should really be subscripts. Like they run into the figure numbers. Like you're mentioning I was looking for figure 1-21 and I couldn't find it. Then I realized that was that should have been a subscript for a footnote. Otherwise, it seems like everything in that first chapter is just background information. But
I did have a question on figure 1-17, dam locations in the San Antonio flood planning region, page 47.
Shoot.
Could not see where Medina Dam is located. Medina Dam is greater than 100 feet in height, so it technically should have a green designation with a small green functional dot,
I will verify, Neffy.
please. And also please verify Calaveras and Bronig Lake Dam. I thought those were higher than 100 feet, but may not. May not, maybe not.
I'll check.
Look,
Yeah, please check.
you know, Medina Lake Dam is interesting because, you know, it was initially started as an irrigation dam, but it really serves as a very good flood protection structure, because so many times it's down Medina Lake, and if
Like now.
if a huge flash flood comes, that dam can actually buffer it from downstream. So I think that needs to be realized, how important that is to protect the people below the dam. And because the use of the dam it's not the same as it used to be. But, you know, sometimes when it fills up that lake, it'll fill up in like a day or two from a storm event. So it's a very important structure.
Yes, sir. Thank you, David. On page 45, it is listed in the table 1-14 as a major reservoir. So I would assume that we have it in that map, Neffy, but.
Ron, on page 43, you talk about natural features at 1.12.1. Can we add at the end of that first paragraph a little bit of information about after flood flow peaks and the increase in stream and river degradation and water quality?
Also, I'm just curious, again, I would yield to the River Authority on this, but the series of dams that the River Authority manages, I assume those are all on this little map here with the dots, but it doesn't seem like there's narrative that talks about those under constructed flood infrastructure, because they do, I mean, it talks about just additional dams on smaller tributaries exist across the area were identified by several sources, including State Water Conservation Board, TCQ, Corps. But I mean, what about all the dams that Sarah manages through that system? And
Those are part of that. We verified that we have all the Sarah dams. I think what we're listing there is the owners, because I don't think y'all don't own any, right? Or is it y'all just manage, right? So I think either the NRCS or TCEQ.
No.
Is it,
That's not right.
that's
inaccurate.
Okay.
Yeah.
We co-own or outright own some.
Yeah, we own them. I mean, Sarah owns them.
Okay, I will verify those. I will get with the team to verify.
I mean, it's
those.
just a pretty big structure that provides flood protection here, I think, and in Carnes.
I know we have those, Suzanne.
They may be these little dots here.
Yes.
But I just feel like it probably as a major system should be listed here and more in the narrative.
Yes, ma'am.
Or could we add a table with
Or a map.
maybe the name of them?
That's what I was thinking, is maybe having because all these little dots represents the dams that we have, but maybe.
And I'm
having a
assuming you're
table.
pulling this database straight from the TCEQ dam inventory information. So
There's a couple sources. We have these all in.
yeah, I would request that we just put in a table that has all the listing of all the structures that.
So does this map do anything for you, or blow the map away and exchange it for a
I
table?
like the map. It's just I'd like to see the information.
Perfect.
Yeah, I think those, I mean, they provide a pretty important component of flood protection here. I mean, what are they? I mean, if I remember my facts right, those dams combined, Bear County hold 3 times the amount of water as Almost Dam.
That is correct.
I mean, if that's a pretty big fact, that should be noted. And then do you mention the tunnel?
Yes, I know we have it in the
Because it's
text.
constructed flood infrastructure, I would assume that that is a pretty big part of the infrastructure. But I may have missed it, so I'm just trying to. Both the San Antonio and the San Pedro.
I will make a note, Suzanne, to verify it. I'm writing it right now.
Hey, and this is Ludovine. So in table 1-13, we do list constructed major infrastructure and have stormwater tunnels there. And I put City of San Antonio, but I can further specify the San Pedro and San Antonio.
I'm sorry, where is that? What did you say?
Page 42. So the tunnel is actually shown on the top of 43
Okay.
in that table, but there's no text about it.
Right, and generally the stormwater tunnel, City of San Antonio is considered the 24-inch pipe underground. The underground MS4 system is usually what, at least in the city, what they refer to as the stormwater tunnels. We have a GIS database, it's called tunnels, and it generally refers to those. So I think it would be appropriate to highlight the major flood tunnels that exist on the San Antonio and San Pedro.
We'll get it added to the table, and we included it in the infrastructure here. That's what the stormwater tunnels is. That's what that refers to. We will put it in the narrative if it's not.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're pretty proud of them here, so I think we should talk about it.
Yeah, we had Houston come visit.
I know, exactly.
Others are looking
Mhm.
at doing the same thing.
Should be pretty proud of them.
Derek did remind me that I can't say we anymore because I don't work there. But on dams that provide flood protection, please add City of San Antonio because San Antonio does have the Almost Dam and a few others. So,
I was wondering where Almost was.
yes, please add to where it says,
Dams that provide flood protection.
right, you have constructed major infrastructure. So.
This is Doris. I put a comment that Bronigan and Calaveras are both less than 100 feet. They're shallow lakes.
Thank you.
I just couldn't get in when y'all were talking about the dams. Are the recharge dams? I know they're not really flood dams, but they obviously, if they're there to help with recharge, did y'all include those? There's not that many of them, but.
They're what? Well,
Yeah,
no,
but
I mean, are you talking about the Salado dams that also recharge? Or are you talking about the recharge dams that have been built for the purposes of recharge? Which ones?
The ones for the purpose of recharge. I mean, they aren't major flood, but they I would assume have make some difference. Just wanted to make sure somebody had thought about it. I'm not sure that they need to be included, but.
On a lot of those flood features, there's not a lot of information on them. So this is just the data that we were able to have. That's not something that TCEQ, NRCS, or
yeah, they don't hold water.
If I'm not mistaken, those are on the TCQ database because of their height. They are actually regulated by TCQ.
Anything that's regulated by TCQ,
that's what I'm
we
saying.
should
If
have
that's
captured.
the database you use, it should be in there, and that's the reason why I'm recommending have a table with all of those so that these type of questions get avoided and we can understand, because in reality there is significant flood storage that exists and infrastructure throughout our community that I think it's important that we identify.
Thank you for that comment.
Totally agree.
Ron, on page 46, beginning with 1.12.3, we talk about as an assessment of condition and functionality of existing infrastructure. And I know that we've had conversations that there's very little information on functionality for natural flood mitigation features. Can we add a little paragraph or address that a little bit?
And the city's not mentioned as the permit holder on the TPDES permit. Did you see that, Nevi? Isn't a joint between SAWS and City of San Antonio? Because you have delegated authority from TCEQ, right, city? It says a TCEQ regulates the discharge of municipal separate stormwater through two sets of phase 1 and phase 2. But I thought that the city of San Antonio, doesn't city have, I'm on the bottom of 45 and the top of 46.
Oh, got it. Yes.
Talking about the MS4 permit. You're not, city of San Antonio is not listed.
Oh, it does say it on there. Okay.
Right, no, I know, it just doesn't say that the
Phase
permit
2.
holder is the city. Does that matter? I mean, I don't know if you want to be listed. I mean, and then Bear County also has a phase 2. Phase 2.
Bear County does have a phase 2, yes. At the end of that, the last paragraph there does say San Antonio's does have a phase 1. And then communities in Karnes and Wilson counties are subject to phase 2.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this catches all of them, because I think some of the smaller communities may be as well. I don't know if if I can try to see if we can gather more information. Do you think if we're going to say one, we should say them all, kind of thing? Is that kind of what y'all are getting at here? I mean, I'll see what I can.
That seems right.
Okay,
I don't
I'll
think
see
you
if I
want to be
can.
specific, and then just some in Karnes and Wilson, for example. I mean, that could be a table, just a list.
Yeah, I would agree. Because some of that is, saying San Antonio and Bear County, that's covering a large portion, both geography and population. But knowing some isn't telling us how much of those downstream counties are covered.
In that same table, doesn't Bernie have more detailed hydraulic information?
Which table, Debbie?
That would be table 1-12 on page 35.
The regional flood, the plans, the individual master plans. I thought the city of Bernie did, but there is a city of Bernie drainage master plan.
On page 35.
Page 35.
Yeah, right at the top of page 35.
But it doesn't go into the details like the Upper Cibolo risk map study. There's not any detail to what's included in that. And I was just curious because I thought they had much more information.
To me, master plan means a whole lot of that. I mean,
I can ask that to be expanded.
On figure 1-16, what qualifies a strong floodplain management practice? Page 32, figure 1-16. I'm asking what qualifies between a strong practice to a moderate practice. And the reason I'm asking is because I happen to know that Bear County has very similar floodplain management practices as the city of San Antonio. At least they do in their ETJ. And underneath the word bear, I see I think, what is the city of San Antonio identified as strong?
And if your question is, are we saying Bear County does not and the city does,
Right.
based on the shading of the whole county?
That's really what I'm getting to. I see the definitions in page 31, but I'm curious why.
You're saying the county should be high?
I am.
It's or. I mean,
So for me, Bear County could go to a higher standard and mirror the city, partly because of the interlocal between the city and county. If it's in the ETJ, you're subject to the city regs no matter what. And that's the vast majority of the county. And so the few projects we do outside the ETJ are usually still done pretty close to the same standard.
that's fair. I mean, this is a very subjective question on that. It leaves a lot open to interpretation on these. And so a lot of it, we were looking to the communities to state that. I think that one time we originally had them ranked as low unless we had spoken to them in this meeting. We decided to put that as moderate in the discussions we had. So that's why, or that it was higher than that. And then, but we can make it strong.
So I guess the question of the group is, do we think City of San Antonio is strong and Bear County isn't? That there's that big of a gap between what's done in and outside the city limits? My answer is no, because of frankly, 2/3 of the county is done to city criteria because of the agreements.
I wonder if it was differentiated because of CRS and the city being.
Right, but the definition is
As
that
or.
So it's not that and, it's or. That's the reason why I would advocate for Bear County to be shaded strong. A little highlight. So Ron, I do have an additional question for you. I did review chapters 1 through 4 this when it was sent out. Is there any difference from what was sent? That's right. Is there any difference between what was submitted to what we currently have today?
For if there's anything different on chapters for 1 and 2, there would be, it would be grammatical. It'd be spelling errors or anything like that. There shouldn't be any information added or changed since that one.
That's what I was I wanted to get to.
For 1 and 2, for chapter 3, there was a table left out that I want to discuss today. And for chapter 4, the description on the methodology that was used, I have an updated chapter 4. I wanted to go through that. That's pretty much the bulk of the chapter. So those are the 2 big questions I had for the group today. Again, when we're asking for this motion, the Water Development Board has told us to get the motion so that we do have a little bit of leeway as we're going through this to make adjustments, non-substantive adjustments as we go through and are putting these together.
Okay, so any other additional questions on chapters 1 and 2?
I think
before we get into chapters 3 and 4, where I guess we're going to have some further discussion.
It's really not that important, but about the what is this, table 1-13, you mentioned in sinkholes that it's unknown, but isn't that just classified information on some of that?
Oh, for the functional or non-functional?
No, sorry, that's the natural features and constructed majors. And in the functioning floodplains, yeah, you got floodplains, wetlands, sinkholes. And on the third column, it says that it's unknown.
Yes, if that's whether or not it's
It's
functioning
functional.
or deficient. We do know that those are sinkholes, but I don't know if there's information out there. I mean, I know some. I mean, I would think most of them are functioning, but
Yeah, I hear you. Okay.
When you refer to functioning, are you talking about the data itself?
No, we're talking about is the system.
Is a sinkhole functioning?
Is the sinkhole functioning?
I mean, it's almost oxymoron.
Yeah.
Basically,
Okay.
Neffy, it's kind of
I interpreted it.
we have in here we have rivers, tributaries, and floodplains. Are they functioning, or is there something that's is the city of San Antonio storm sewer system functioning or non-functioning? I mean, if it's I guess we can say that it's a little bit of both, but you know.
I'm sorry, I just saw this too. You're using generic information about dam safety under page 46. But again, if my data is still correct, I think all the dams in this watershed are all but the Escondido ones, I think. They all meet state dam safety standards, I think. Unless you're still considering those two.
They meet, but they're lower
Risk.
Yeah, there's a higher risk, not high risk, but higher risk in cards.
So, I mean, this generic information here would suggest that some of the dams in this watershed don't meet dam safety standards. And I don't think I think it would be, at least in this basin, it would be nice to be able to state that all of the dams within this basin are currently meeting dam safety standards based on their classification, if that's true still.
I have a question.
They're private.
No, I'm saying the ones that are in the soil, in the small watershed dam program.
Okay.
I have a question.
Is that it?
Like our Bronigan Calaveras, for example, are considered higher risk just because of size, but there's, they meet the safety standards.
Right.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering if we would want to note.
Yeah, that's why. Let's put together the table and identify that.
If they meet standards or not. I mean, I think it would be important for this basin
Right.
to have data that would suggest that we're in compliance. We spend a lot of money, time, and energy to make sure that Bear County has invested
Right.
a lot of money in that, for example. Sorry, I apologize.
You don't have to apologize. That's what we're here for. That's what this is for. Okay. Any other comments on chapters 1 and 2?
I did have one question now that I was
Yeah.
going through, and I meant to get with Derek and maybe Aaron, Melissa. Maybe y'all know. We found it later in the process, before we had made the statement that there weren't any levees within the San Antonio River Basin. When you go to the National Levee Database, there are some listed, and they're all unaccredited, but they're right. They're in Refugio County, and so I know it's not normally, but I don't know if that was something that y'all had any information on, or possibly because it's almost at the confluence with the Guad. So I was going to reach out to them maybe and see if they had it, because one of them is almost on the edge of the region. So okay, that answers my question. I will.
All
I
right,
can-
let's move on to the next item. We're coming up on an hour.
All right. Chapter
So-
2, nothing on Chapter 2. As far as that, this is another one that we've seen. This is mostly, this information is essentially what we've worked with the River Authority on, gathering all of the floodplain data. It's the existing and future floodplain data that we went over several times. Y'all see, most of this information is straight. I don't think there's any additional information than what we saw in the tech memo.
I had a comment on page 2-17 on table 2-4. And you do have the information in the text, but I was wondering, adding for those that will just be skimming through this, in the table heading under buffer, to just note that it is for that distance on each side.
I saw a thumbs up. I'm assuming that means they'll do it.
Got it.
All right.
I agree.
Let's get into the juicy one, chapter 3.
All right, chapter 3. Chapter 3 talks about floodplain management practices and flood protection goals. It talks about, the CRS rating, it, goes for, we try to get, gather a lot. Here's the figure 3.3 is your one with moderate and strong and low. We did that again. We'll update that one, making a note now. And then, so before we get into the goals section, y'all seen that. There's a table as on page, I guess it would be 3-11. There's a table that you're seeing that's blank on the back page. And so what that is that's anything that we're going to recommend for higher standards. So we've kind of had that conversation in the past, never really dug into it real deep to talk about any higher standards. So I have a table here that I'm going to hand out now that we had collected from through some of the things we had talked about here, some of the things that in other regions that we grabbed, and but essentially some of the regions are recommending it's not this planning group's responsibility to decide what each entity does as far as their higher standards. So there's some regions that aren't recommending any. There's some that are recommending a select few. There's some that are recommending a list like this. And so,
and I'll chime in. I think let's look at the list. I generally agree that this group, it's not our role. Each of those governmental entities need to come up with their own. When we talked about this at one of those very, very first technical committee meetings, we had someone from Comal County on the phone, in fact, who said, hey, that needs to be our county's decision. I don't need a commissioner trying to explain to a citizen, while some other group somewhere else said, hey, y'all should make them build their house 2 feet higher than their neighbor, or we have to do floodplain buyouts, when elected officials know those are voters, not just houses. And that our goal was really to bring everyone up to a base standard. Hey, get floodplains mapped. Hey, don't keep putting new structures in floodplain. But that we weren't, hey, let's encourage and incentivize nature-based solutions as a combo for the future, and not just do it the way we always had, but not for us to come in and say, we believe these are the new minimum standards everyone should meet. I mean, that was my recollection and takeaway of that technical committee where we first talked about this. And I'll let others weigh in on opinions, but that's, I think, where I was then, where I still am. I want everyone to come to a minimum. I'm all for above and beyond, but that's to me a community by community decision.
Kara, I need to jump in.
And we haven't had, in my opinion, the other thing is concern of this. We have had zero public outreach and zero substantial discussion on us going further. And I believe that's a pretty significant thing that should have input before we as an advisory group go make a recommendation above and beyond.
So a couple of thoughts on that, because and Kara, I do agree with that. And I do remember us having that discussion, but there are two things that I did notice that in the report, there is 3% of the communities do not participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. There is, and I don't know if that 3% is one community or what.
It's 3 cities.
It's 3 cities that do not participate. So so one thought is get to that basic minimum standard, which is participation in the NFIP program at minimum. The other part that I'm kind of struggling with really has to do with the criteria given to us by the Texas Water Development Board, which means that any project that's identified or will be endorsed cannot have an adverse impact. That's where, on one hand, I agree with what we're saying, that it's really not our position to be dictating what the standards need to be, and that's going to be per region or per area. But there is a standard required for each of those projects. So I want us to think about those two. One, participation in the NFIP, and then that idea of part of the requirement for these projects that there is not an adverse impact with these projects.
Aren't those items really already addressed in our goals? Is some of the minimum, I mean, wasn't one of our goals to get everyone to that? I mean, so I think I'm wanting to make sure, it's been a long time since I looked at these, and, as I've admitted, I haven't looked at this, but weren't our committee goals that are in this section here some of those type of things? And what you're talking about is above and beyond those goals we've already set, of saying things like finished floor is this much higher and regulations are this much more. And it's really almost predominantly a regulation additional, correct?
A lot of what I have here on this sheet is, again, if there's other things, recommendations of floodplain management practices. I mean, if there's something strongly that this group feels that we need to put out there, we can make it. But for the most part, these were regulatory. There were some technical ones lower down that we can look at, but for the most part, a lot of these were the regulatory. I think some of the technical ones were everybody adapting ILS 14. Making sure that people have models for their communities, for their having inventory of their storm drains. There's a lot of things out there that you could do technically that we're recommending floodplain management practices. But
and Ron, I also want to be clear that by us recommending this, that doesn't necessarily mean that if a community is not participating in NFIP or has not adopted the latest Atlas 14, that doesn't mean that those projects, we won't accept any of those projects. That I want to be clear that we're not saying that.
That is correct.
That if you're in a community that has not adopted the latest Atlas 14 and you do have a need, by you not adopt, that doesn't mean we're gonna kick that project out. That's not our role. That's not our charge. We will accept any of those projects, any project.
Absolutely. This has no bearing on projects. This simply is.
I want to make sure that's clear.
If we see deficits anywhere that we think that need recommending, that we do that.
So one of my concerns would be kind of, I think, to where Neffy is headed. What if in the criteria, evaluation and prioritization criteria, something comes that our development board is setting that we don't have a say in and don't even know, that there's an item that says extra points or lose points if you're not in compliance with recommendations of the committee. We don't know that yet. And so I'm a little hesitant to, adopt thing. And again, I think we can go through this and maybe compare some of it to what we've already in our goals. And is it somewhat addressed or not addressed or similar? But, looking at, and it was because when I looked down, first thing I saw was all subdivision proposals shall show the locations of special flood hazard and local floodplains within the subject property and blah, blah, blah. Well, that's great, but that's really about what a community requires shown on their plans and plats. That's not really, I think those kind of things and details.
If we remove the in the title recommendations and just said floodplain management and land use practices to reduce risk, or that could reduce risk versus calling it a recommendation, would that cover your issue?
I don't think there's a section of the report that addresses that. I mean, a part of our issue is you're having to put this because there's a required section by Water Development Board that says if your committee is going to adopt anything above and beyond, this is where you list it, and not really an opportunity for information purposes in the report. That doesn't mean information can't be part of our education outreach program eventually, but the structure of the format and report from Water Development Board doesn't really give you that kind of leeway, does it?
We could find a way to put in, what kind of things we could put in floodplain management practices, higher standard, but it's not asking for example, higher floodplain management practices. It's asking for, it's asking for a recommendation. So if we don't want any of these, I have to we'll put in here the regional flood planning group at this time does not have any recommended higher standards for, to meet the requirements of what they're asking for.
What about the stated goals? Maybe we limit it to just what goals we have set out.
Could you make, and maybe it's here because I thought I remembered seeing something, but have a goal that, and again, no one knows who's going to implement any of these things. That has not been determined, but have a goal that would suggest that each community, how many communities have assessed their regulations against NFIP standards. That way, because it sounds like what these are saying is some of these over here, if I'm reading this right, this standard meets a statement of purpose for NFIP. And some communities are doing this at a higher rate or higher standard than others. Is that correct?
Well, what we're saying is there are 3 communities in our whole watershed that don't meet NIFP
No,
right
and
now.
I think we need to get those folks in NFIP, but I'm saying to get to this idea of looking at if there are floodplain management and land use practice standards that are have a flood benefit that may not be in those cities, should the goal be to do an assessment of those?
So could I
How
ask?
many communities have done an assessment, or I don't know the right words, but in other words, asking the communities to do this instead of us doing this.
But I like the idea of a goal.
Could I ask one thing? Can we put up, is it possible to put up our tables 3, 6 and on? Because refreshing our minds, I think, of what we've already set as a number of these goals, or walking through that, because I do think, like table 3.8 on page 3-15, our first goal is establish a baseline and increase the number of entities that utilize Atlas 14, basically 50%, and increase the number of entities that adopt it are best available from NOAA by 100% long-term. I mean, we have many of the concepts we have interwoven, I think, in here without being as specific to a community of how and what they need to do. We're not telling them, go set your finished floor elevation this much or this much, depending on what your study is. We're really focusing on, we really want to move all of you to Atlas 14. We really want to move all of this. So I don't know if everybody's really had a chance to feel comfortable with what our goals are before we say going beyond our goals.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I think I can. Hey, I'm Sydney Broughton with HAF, and we've done. I think I can clarify a little bit about this. So we're not necessarily with these of like recommending of like, okay, you need to you need to adopt all of these into your ordinances. These are more so tools of if a community, even if they're not NFIP participants, we're looking to increase their higher standards. Like we know we want to increase and add in some higher standards. We just don't really know what that looks like. These are example statements in the language that you would then put into a floodplain ordinance of, you know, we know we want to, if they wanted to add something for the finished floor elevation, but they have no clue what that looks like, of they could come to the flood plan and look at an example statement of that they could include into their own ordinance.
So for me, that is not really belongs in the plan. That becomes part of the public outreach going forward, part of, you know, I don't want this group to say, hey, look, this is the laundry list you, a community, should use if you don't know what to do. Because this is a list, but it's not the only list, and it shouldn't be the list. And I'm concerned that we start sending that message that this is the only list. And I am really uncomfortable with this list, not because I take exception to issues on the list. We have not gone out to communities. We have not gone out to a regulated community. We have not, I mean, we as a group haven't even reviewed this. I'm really uncomfortable with suddenly us saying, yeah, let's be sure and include this as the list.
But wouldn't that come out in the public comment section? The time that, I mean, to me, this is an opportunity to put it out there and get the comment that you're looking for.
No, because what we just heard is you can't make a lot of changes. So what we put out there is us saying this is what we believe. And, you know, as you know, I've sat on the development community a long time sides, and the public entities hear the conversation of, it isn't that a regulated community is opposed to regulations. They're opposed to a lack of conversation about those steps. And this to me is a lack of conversation about any of that. We as a group haven't even talked about all of these.
You know what I would rather see that section point to the goals that we have set. The goals is something we've talked about. It's something that's been put out there. If we want to have an area where communities can reference, if we want to do that, I would almost want to put this table that as an appendix, as a, here's examples of what others are doing, instead of this is what we committee believe you should be doing. Here's an example of what City of Runge is doing, or whatever community. And then we have this database shown in the appendices where they can read, okay, the floodplain standard is this, NFIP. This information would be great as an appendices. In the body of this document, I would rather us point to the goals that we have set.
So we would be able to give more details in the goals, because the goals are pretty in general.
Talk about, I don't think they have anything here about development regulations, right?
Well, there is some, and even like on the education on table 3.6, page 314, you know, one of our goals is increase the proficiency of stakeholders and floodplain managers throughout the region and improve that 50% on, nature-based solutions, floodplain preservation, cost benefit of structure, and then 100% is long-term. For me,
So
those
maybe-
are so open-ended.
So
A
you
lot
could
of
add to
these.
this floodplain regulations.
And,
You
and
could add in here and review of floodplain regulations or development regulations. You could add something into these things about trying to get people to look at them. I think the point is, do we want to raise the proficiency of people looking at their ordinances? their
yes, and
development
Suzanne, I think
ordinances?
that's exactly where I'm
But you could
going.
add it here or look at your flood, because we don't necessarily have that specifically of looking at updating their ordinances.
I don't have a problem in adding, review of floodplain ordinances and regulations as a outreach and education goal, because that does give it open-ended. It does allow for those that have no idea, come to an appendix that's got options or go, and it can be part of our ongoing effort that isn't as specific as this kind of list.
And the reason why I'm saying that is, let's take, for example, table 3-9, flood prevention goals. One of those is to increase the number of entities which regulate to the 100 or the 1% annual chance future conditions. That's a goal that we've set out that, and it's a short-term 10-year goal that people start looking to that. If this was on the appendices, that goal may be included in one of these, and who's doing that? Oh, okay, well, so-and-so, this is how they do it. 1% annual chance, floodplain, and so forth. And they can look at it, but it's not necessarily something that we as a body are saying everybody shall or will.
Right.
That's what I'm recommending, that in that table, it points to some of the goals that are a little bit broader.
But this is not saying which cities have this and which cities don't.
No, but they have it. I mean, it's mainly Bernie and San Antonio, this list. Let's get real.
It's not on this table, but I mean, I have where these all came from. And this wasn't, the list of these wasn't these are the only ones where like we recommend as higher standards. This was more so, okay, here's what some examples of further higher standards look like. These are not the only ones that you could adopt of just hey, here gives you an idea. And if you wanted to take this list further, then so be it. And maybe, if this stays in the body, that's a clarification in the text of these are not the only ordinances or higher standards that you could adopt. It's just an option for some of these other communities looking to adopt higher standards.
What I would recommend is, to Suzanne's item on the education, we're adding a comma floodplain / development regulations as something to, evaluating those. And there might be other places. And then adding what Neffy's doing, pointing to an appendix that is some examples of things compiled to date that, can be not even evaluated, just here's a laundry list of what some communities are doing and could be considered is a better way than us. These, for me, if we're saying if there are things we believe above and beyond, I think they already should have been in our goals to me, and should not be specific of telling a community how to do that versus telling a community, I really do believe communities should not be letting new structures built in the 100-year floodplain. But we don't need a list to tell them exactly how that happens from us.
I would just ask Ron, is there any requirement from TWDB for some specific, like, are we required to say, because I'm looking at page 3-10, is there a requirement to say these are the technical higher standards, from the Water Development Board, or is that something that just was crafted during this process?
We're asked in the guidelines to provide recommended higher standards. We don't have to, we can, I think a perfectly good explanation would be, there are higher standards outlined in the goals found in section blah, blah, blah. Please refer, at this time, the Region 12 recommends those as the higher standards that each entity should be striving for. I mean, we can craft that however you want it to be, but we can definitely point to the goals.
Whatever.
The one thing
the
that
key is examples in the appendix.
Right.
But I want to make sure we're meeting the requirements
That would definitely
have
meet
been
the
put
requirements.
upon us.
Yes, because we're not the only flood planning group saying we don't want this specific list. Our goals are our standards. I mean, that we would not be alone in that approach.
That makes sense, Ron. You're good with that?
Yes. The one thing I will caution against that at this time, you were talking about the goals. I can't add anything to the goals. The goals have to be voted on. We voted on those. If I'm going to add what Suzanne suggested to the goals, we would have to vote on that at the next meet. We'd have to post that and go through all that. So
instead of the goals statement being revised in the paragraphs above and below the boxes, that isn't the goal itself, can we add references to develop floodplain regulations and development regulations? I mean, I'm not looking at the words right now, but it seems like these paragraphs are more descriptions of, hey, we've got it and here's some tools and we could do that.
in the goals section or the.
Yes.
Are you saying that instead of including that text in the description of the goals, have that text in the body of the report to kind of cover all the different scenarios? Because otherwise you're going to be adding that text, review of the floodplain ordinance. You're going to be reviewing it upteen times. Include a paragraph or a description of that comment in the body of the report to cover that. And hopefully that's
Would not require a separate vote.
And so do we want to put that in the goals section, or we want to put that in the recommendation of higher standards is to reference the goals and we're in I'll figure out an eloquent way to say that in support of communities looking at ways to advance their floodplain management practices through higher something.
Right. Reviewing their individual and evaluate, and then make a note that in appendix so-and-so are examples of other communities.
Or specific regulation examples, but there's other things.
Do you want that in an appendix or leave it in the body? You want it in an appendix, pull it completely out. Okay.
Okay, so you could write under page 3-13, the last sentence where it says increase education and awareness opportunities, improves flood hazard awareness, encourages review of local regulations and development standards, and promotes the protection of people and property by better preparing, blah, blah, blah. So you could add improves flood hazard awareness, encourages communities to review local regulations and development standards, and promotes the protection of people and property, better preparing the SAFPR entities for future flood risk or for future flood events.
And I liked your words, Ron, of floodplain management, so that it's not solely entirely
Encourages review.
their floodplain management practices.
Okay, review of their floodplain management practices. Floodplain management practices. Promotes the protection of people and property by better preparing the SAFPR entities for future flooding events. Then you can say that reference Appendix X for ideas, suggested.
Well, or maybe we add the wording here on 3-13 Suzanne was just talking about, but also in the recommended section, we do what you were just proposing, Ron.
Yes, I agree.
I would put a reference here, but also address it more specifically in the appendix, reference being in the additional.
Yeah, because it helps better define that goal, which the group wants to do, is better define that goal for promoting that. And then we also recommended in there that our recommendation is for every community to look at their floodplain management practices and do better. So,
Ron, in the interest of time, we have 30 minutes, so I need you to step on it.
All right.
I know, it's me.
So is everybody, so the goals, the last part of 3 was the goals, and we've been through that, voted on that, so I think we can all be comfortable there. So that's chapters 1 through 3. I mentioned there was an update in chapter 4. So chapter 4, one of the things that it asked us to do is calculate a flood risk per individual hub.
I don't know if anybody else online. I lost audio. I can hear, but it's very faint. I can't really hear what's being said.
Ron walked away from his microphone. That's his fault.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Or it's the rest of our fault for all wanting to talk. It's not Ron's fault. It's the rest of us, Kendall, because we want to talk too.
I need some water.
Did this get sent out to the people online?
Yes, Kendall's bringing it up. Or Ludovine, that also needs to go to Kendall to bring up. Please send her that.
Yep, I just sent you chapter 4, Kendall.
So go through it real quick. The assessment talks about the data gaps, flood boundary gaps. The couple of flood boundary gaps we worked with the River Authority, and we identified a couple of basins, a couple of areas in the upper basin where some of the mapping could go out a little bit farther. There was a couple of sub-watersheds that didn't get mapped that were greater than a square mile. So Aaron pointed those out, so we captured that. Plus, we also made a note of future flood needs as those areas downstream that don't currently have the future floodplains. Again, it's just a recommendation that that be considered going forward, is possibly doing some future floodplains downstream. So that's ultimately what we get to. So for 4.2.4 on page 4-3. So this, basically here you see the San Antonio flood planning region in the HUC 12 watersheds. So you see how many, when your eyes got big, Debbie, it was, there are a lot of those sub watersheds. So we have to give a score to each one of these HUCs. And there really wasn't a methodology, a direct methodology given by the Water Development Board. But we were told, part of it is it needed to be based on property damage and some parameters, and we'll go through that. And so we came up with a methodology in the previous chapter 4 that we gave you. I don't think that methodology, I didn't like the way that methodology was described. I'm not so sure I like this one yet. That's why I'm trying to get some input. It's a lot of information, difficult, need some recommendations on simplifying it, or if it how much detail we need to go in. So I'm going to jump into it. I'm going to try to walk through it. I know there's going to be some questions, and I can do some things to help clarify it, but I'm going to walk through it real quick. So below that figure 4.1, the data points, we have data points for the following categories: property damage, loss of life, exposure, building exposure, vulnerability, critical facilities, low water crossings, dams, and public comment. So we had the number of these, right? We were able through GIS to calculate the number of these occurrences in each HUC. And then part of that also is we also had to consider length of roadways in the floodplain and agriculture in the floodplain. And so to normalize that, to get that into this, to what we did is we established the relative density of those to make sure that, because one HUC may be smaller than the other, and we wanted to make sure that it had the same, because we're trying to come up with a way to give this a risk. So we actually got the density of the length of the roadways and agricultural lands and basically got the total length of the total area and divided by the area of the HUC to kind of get the density of those. So then each one of those categories were normalized on a scale of 0 to 1. So 1 being whatever the max was is so each category had a 0 to 1 normalization done on it, and the normalizations were then summed. This is where we kind of start getting difficult. So we summed all of the normalizations, and then we were able to calculate all of the occurrences, and then that was divided. The sum of each was divided by the total, so we were able to get a percent, a weighted percent. And so what that weighted percent is, right? That weighted percent is the number basically for each HUC. So when you go through and you see this 5.2 as the below, it starts giving the weighted percent. So of all the things that have occurred in that HUC, 5.2% of them, of all the things off this list, 5.2% of them were property damage. And so on and so forth down the list. And so we were able to get the occurrence percentage. And then we were able to take that and go back and normal. And we wanted to be able to expand that scale. So we took those percentages, multiplied them back by the occurrences that happened in each HUC. And we were able to come up, and then we normalized that on a 0 to 5, where 0 being the least number of occurrences and 5 being the highest. So it is a difficult process. I wasn't the one that invented this process. Most of the regions are using this process, very similar to that.
The fact that you have to explain it so much is very problematic.
And a lot of the other regions aren't going into the detail, but I knew that if I brought that to you, Derek, and you, Neffy, and you, Dave, y'all would be kicking me and saying, what is this? And so I wanted to sit there and explain this to you, because I need to be able to provide a risk.
Because I have, because I'm looking at the audience, you have people with a lot of experience in this room that are, looking at this thing. Yeah. Especially at 3:40 in the afternoon. But I think if you're more, a citizen, or, that is not as experienced in some of these things, trying to figure out how you got here, and, your couple-minute explanation it's not you, it's complicated, but it's not clear in this to me and to the average citizen. And then I go into some other questions about, because I want to make sure I understand, your weighting is based on the number of occurrences, but I would argue that that is erroneous, because just because there's roadway length of 17.5 doesn't necessarily mean that that should outweigh historical life loss.
It's not. This isn't. Don't think of it as a risk, or don't think of it as a. Hold on. Don't think of it as we're putting one thing higher than the other. Basically, what we're saying is, if you're in this HUC 12, what risk do you have? You have a life loss risk if you're sitting at home. But what is that risk that you have of all the things that have happened off of this list? That was the life loss. There's not a very good high chance of it, right? What is your actual risk is different from how we feel that it should be weighted or scored. And
because saying weighted has a different connotation typically when you're doing something like this than how y'all used it.
Okay, and I just wanted to make that clear. So there's nothing in that where I'm saying I think life loss has a lower. What I'm trying to see.
But we've added them all equally
3.5
to get to table 4-2, I think is kind of where we're going. So we're saying every category is a little piece, and they're all equal.
He needed to make it add up to 100%, and that's how he got here. But they're not weighted.
You're looking at that table right there. I gave you. Please look in the updated. I took the
Just
table
throw
out
that
because
away.
the
Yeah, I
table,
was like, what's table 4.1?
the original had the table as an example, and I think it confused the situation.
But it's so clear now.
Well, and to make sure
It's
you're
different.
and to make sure you're not double counting.
For
Is property damage vulnerability and property damage critical facilities counting some of our critical facilities being double counted, because those are also building structures.
And like I'm assuming historical life loss at 3.5% is, excluding, that's the non-life loss, low water crossings and dams. That's all the other life loss, or is life loss historical including, no, it can't be when you see the percentages.
that was supposed to be removed. The life loss in front of dams and low water crossings. I apologize. I removed that. I don't know how that got back on there.
Oh, so you really confused the hell out of us.
No, the historic life loss is that life loss due to low water crossings and dams. We didn't have that shouldn't have been there. That was trying to correlate it back to something that was unrelated.
Ron, let me take a step back here, because obviously we have a lot of very strong technical minded folks that love the details, and I'm right there with them. But what's the purpose of this? Ultimately, the purpose of it, we're creating a map to cross-reference, maybe with project locations. So explain to me in a couple of words, what's the value of having this HUX, risk HUX?
Yes. So
right, it is a requirement, but explain to me the purpose of it.
So the purpose of that is to correlate it to gaps in the region. Where do we need more projects? Because if you kind of look, we overlay it with study area, like the proposed study areas, and we overlay it with the floodplain management practices.
Correct. So it's getting to my point here, is that for a region, it would benefit us to show areas, because the need is great. And I'm thinking of the downstream counties. We have a need. So it benefits us to show darker areas, if you will. Because if we happen to have gaps there, that helps identify, in a visual sense, identify areas where we need projects, we need information, we need studies. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
I have major concerns that, based on what was just discussed, that this is going to be used as a cross-reference to show where projects may need to be focused, because we just saw this today. We're 2 weeks out, give or take, from the draft report. I mean, this is something like this is not something that you throw together if you're going to be making, and no disrespect to anybody, but like, this is a fairly significant effort typically to do an analysis like this and take data. And because I'm very hesitant to say, and I hope Water Development Board is listening, I understand that there may be a HUC requirement, but like this could be very, this could influence a whole lot of things. And I feel like it's coming in very last minute without a chance to discuss it at all. It hasn't come to the technical committee even, to go through this. So I have a lot of concerns about the methodology and the delivery. I'm not saying it's wrong, but the inability to digest it and have a really thorough technical discussion on something that could shape how projects are guided and funded in the future gives me great pause.
Derek, I completely agree with you. I would think, again, I can't speak for the board, for the Water Development Board, but I would think this would be one of the tools that they reference. That would be one of the things that they're going to look at. I mean, at least, why go through the effort of putting this together if it's not? So I would think that it certainly is. Is it possible for us to spend some more time at the next technical committee to reviewing some of that methodology to get a better sense of it? meaning we can approve the document, the sections 1 through 4 as we plan to, with the caveat or with the exception, if you will, for this until the technical committee has had a chance to review it. Is that possible?
It is.
I guess one just quick question. I mean, because I agree with Derek. I mean, the reality is if the table that we're going to show on all the FMXs doesn't focus projects in this dark brown area, then people are going to say you have a dark brown area, that's your highest risk, and you don't have projects that are associated with mitigating that risk. How do these two things go together? I completely get the exposure that we could be seeing. But my question is, though, is it too simple, or for the purposes of this exercise, to build on the damage centers / modeling updates that the River Authority has been doing and reflect that here? Because you have gone through that exercise recently, and I'm just wondering if that could be the driver of some of the darker areas. You may, I mean, if you have another weighted factor you want to put in there, that's fine, but it just seems like that may drive.
But it sounds like that's what they're including in the data set, including comments from the public, as the public has commented and said, hey, I happen to know that there's some flooding here. That's a part of the database that you're including, correct?
I'm just talking about the new, the new floodplain map updates.
Right.
That are not officially, you can't show them as official adoption because they haven't been officially adopted, correct? So they can't be reflected.
That is correct.
But the analysis has been done recently that reflects the Atlas 14 stuff. It's just not public yet, but it could be highlighted here to say this, to show that this is where the brown areas should be technically, with some of the work the more updated work that's been done.
Well, and I guess I'm not clear what the purpose of this is, because is it an attempt to convey risk to the public, or is it an attempt to show where projects are? Because if it's an attempt to show where projects should go, then I would argue there should be a standard methodology that the state should apply across the board for consistency and fairness, not what every region comes up with. And, it also doesn't take into account what mitigation measures might already be in place, because there may be historical flooding data, but now they may be mitigated in a certain way, and it doesn't necessarily reflect those things either. So I go back to, I have a whole lot of concerns about this whole thing.
I mean, it's in the chapter 4, which is identification of flood mitigation needs. So it is trying to identify flood mitigation needs by identifying risk per each HUC, and to show what your risk is per each HUC. And
are these flood risk data categories set in the in your directives?
Yes.
All right.
And is this methodology? You said you didn't invent this methodology. How many of the regions are using it? I mean, I agree with Derek that if this is a tool that's going to be used for the identification of areas that require projects, and it needs to be universally applied to all the regions.
I can look into that.
I mean, because the standard definition of risk is, probability times potential, loss or damage. How is that factored into this?
And is that a monetary loss included? Because if you do monetary, then that really puts the heavy weight up on the Bexar County.
So we have 10 minutes. In the interest of time, I'm going to ask for a motion for approval of chapters 1, 2, 3, and portions of chapter 4.
Can we, before we jump to that, Ron, can I go back and just make a comment on chapter 3, pages 3, 5, and 3, 6? There's these tables about level of enforcement and high, moderate, low, and is any of that, and table figure 3, 2 about percentage of entities that require higher standards, You know, and going back to that conversation earlier where we said Bear County is higher standards because while their regulations may not show it, they're subject to the city regulations. Will that change any of this, or can we be sure and look at how we address that here?
Yes.
Am
Bear
I making
County,
sense?
with changing Bear counties to strong? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to make one more comment about addressing some of the issues with TxDOT in our recommendations.
I was going to ask about that too. How much communication overall has there been with TxDOT? Have they been engaged, commented, come to anything? Have y'all met with them? I mean, we all know a big part of the issues are TxDOT structures, and that's a completely absent gap in all of this, to Debbie's.
So we have some of the information. There's a lot of information that TxDOT had. We have been talking with Anita and James about them discussions, and I think that the Water Development Board is doing that on a statewide level. But I can't speak for them. But I do know that, yeah, that and I think that that's probably going to be something that comes out of the recommendations from chapter 8 or whatever. That's the legislative, and what we can do in future flood plans. More coordination with TxDOT of this. I definitely think that needs to happen. But you are correct. We don't have all of their information. That's not that they would send that we've reached out and we don't even know who to ask to send us all of that information. That we keep getting the run around in the region.
Hey, Ron, I can jump in and just give an update that we did finally send that out asking for statewide data. As soon as we hear something back, I will keep you updated, but we did finally send that request out.
I mean, and I'll add in whether it's here in the above additional higher recommended standards or later, not just legislative. Sorry, TxDOT needs to be regulating and sizing structures to the same standard that everybody else does. I mean, they go to existing at lower flood frequencies than anyone else. You go build a project upstream of a TxDOT roadway and you are guaranteed detention because you are guaranteed it's been sized a lower storm than any other entity would do. And I just think it's not right that we're moving forward trying to say we're trying to do better and a state agency has got the smallest sizing requirement out there.
I'd like to see it throughout the recommendations.
All
and
right.
any place that you feel
Let's not
appropriate.
start bashing here. All right.
So is that something that the planning group is asking me to add to chapter 3 as a recommendation, or are we gonna worry about that in chapter 8 in the legislative?
Well, for me, I don't know why it's legislative. TxDOT makes the decision themselves of what their design criteria is. And I think their design criteria should meet a minimum standard that we're talking about in here and should not be to a different standard.
The challenge that I have is that
I don't have to listen. I still think it's a recommendation.
But Kara, the challenge is that it's by district. There are certain TxDOT districts that do follow certain standards and others that don't. Unfortunately, some of those have been because of legislative or because of challenges in the law that requires them to do that, but not all of them.
And I guess the question then is at both places, that in the legislative section there, but in the guideline, our recommendations, is there something, or do we want to just stay silent on it?
That has to be in the legislative, because if they build to the standard they need to, it's going to cost more money. And the appropriations are going to have to be higher for TxDOT in order for them to build to the standard.
And that's why my recommendation would be in section 8.
Okay, but that same comment applies to any and every other project.
I know, but what I'm saying is but the city of San Antonio and Bear County are already designing their local projects to a higher standard. Thus, those costs are already included at the local level. The state is not doing the same to their infrastructure.
TxDOT does not set their design standards. To Neffy's point, it's done by district based on legislative appropriations.
Right, but the legislature can say no adverse impact or something like every project you do cannot have an adverse impact on any local infrastructure. And if they have to do that, then they're going to have to do it to a higher standard. And that means that they're going to have to pay, they're going to have to appropriate.
Well, can we just put it in the recommendations and in the chapter 7, both locations?
If we just think it goes to legislative and it's the hammer, not the conversation, that's fine. But
Both.
it's a big gap in this whole process that
Oh.
impacts everything everyone else
It
does.
changes that whole risk map we just looked at.
Absolutely. All right. I need a motion. I need a motion of approval of chapters 1, 2, 3, 4.1, and to allow the technical consultant to make any appropriate edits as necessary. So can
As were discussed today.
as discussed today? Yes, sir.
And non-substantive edits.
Right. Correct.
Yep.
That goes without saying. Okay.
This is Debbie Reed, and I make a motion to approve as stated.
I get a second.
I'll second. I don't like fours.
Any other discussion? Any further discussions about this motion? Up to 4.1, section 4.1. So 1, 2, 3, 4.1. That works for you, right? Okay. Any further discussion? Mr. Gonzalez, I saw your hand go up. No, you were just stretching. Okay. Okay. Hearing none, let's take a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes. Thank you. Whew, with 3 minutes left. All right. Moving on to item number 9. I'm sorry, 8. There I go, trying to jump the gun here. Item 8, technical consultant.
I'm going to be brief. I think if you bring up one of the things that was asked is to talk about the public comments. I think Kendall has on the next slide is a summation of all the public comments. We've compiled those. We've got a list of those. We got them on a map. We got all that. And so we're working through that process. And we were asked to track those back to projects. With consideration of time today, plus what we're working on, I'm asking that we move that to our first agenda, our first regional planning group meeting after August 1st.
Oh, okay, let me stop you there. So item number 8 is the additional chapters.
Oh, sorry, I jumped ahead too.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, I did the same thing, don't worry. So
the additional chapters is kind of a little bit of what we discussed earlier, kind of when the technical committee can expect them, that was really just about what you can expect with the upcoming chapters and how we're going to go through the process. So no further comments. Yes.
Okay, something that what we were talking about when the information is going to go out for review. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Let's move on to agenda number 9. This was important. We spent a lot of time talking about this, and that's the whole transparency thing of how are we going to communicate back.
Yes.
So
wanted to just let you know that we've after everything is done at this point, all of the data has been compiled. You can see we have all the dots on the map, that some of the maps you've seen previously. You can see where the comments came from, who they came from, or where they were at. So we've already started going back and correlating those as we're going through the FMXs and FMEs and FMPs. And so with everything that we have on our plate, at this meeting and the next couple of meetings, I'm asking that we focus our time on the chapters and getting that draft plan out, and we can have this discussion further down the road, because those are all things that we can do in the amendment process if we need to add anything or change buckets or any of that stuff.
okay, I want to make sure and get this addressed, because this was important to us all on how we are communicating back the information that was submitted to us.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to do it. Just think it'll be better after we we need to focus on the chapters right now.
Any further discussions on that?
Okay, I just have a quick
Yes,
question.
of course.
So, but some of these are municipalities that have put things in. Like, I mean, I see Dave Mock, there's a comment. I mean, his name is on one of these, Jeffrey Carroll's name's on some of these. So those are going to be punted until after August 1st, so they won't be in the draft plan, even if they came.
No. With just discussing on our topic of how FMX is. Do we have an FMX identified for each one of those comments? This exercise that y'all asked to do. How are we circling back with everyone? And we're looking at all the compiled. You know, we were still compiling all the FMXs, adding information, and so we will correlate the citizen comments or the public comments back to projects that have been identified and how we've reached back out to them.
Okay, so this list I'm looking at, which I don't know if this is the same list, because it says flood prone comments. Is that the same list? Doesn't.
It's
the same list?
This is an updated table that provides clearer information. The presentation that was requested regarding the number of citizen submittals and what happened to them in terms of FNXs and how they were applied has been pushed to a later date. This is a briefing on the statistics that we received.
Okay. My question is just really about the list of FMXs that will be in the draft plan. If some of these, because I can't read this closely because it's so tiny, the ones that I'm just using Jeffrey Carroll as an example, are there going to be FMXs in the document that reflect his comments here from the city of Bernie, or no?
At this time, I do not know if there is a project for every comment. That's what we're going to present at the next one, and that's what we're going to present, either to find one or talk to that entity on how we are going to address that comment. Individual
because
comments.
that's what the discussion was last time, Suzanne, if you remember.
No, I know,
if somebody
I know.
from the public commented, what are we doing with that information? Do we just get it and say, oh, great? Or are we actually developing, is there a project associated? Or if not, is there a study associated?
Well,
with it? And that's my hope that there is.
My concern is not so much the general public. My concern is those government partners that have been engaged in this from, the beginning, City of Bernie, Bear County. If there's other public entities who have put in comments because if they've seen stuff or they say, wait a minute, you've missed something, I want it in. I just want to see if those are going to be in the draft, or are we going to punt that till July of next year for these projects that our governmental partners, floodplain managers have put in, is my question, not general public.
I would think it can be in, if it doesn't make it into the draft that goes out early August, I would say that's a public comment that can be received during this 30-day window, and it can be addressed just like we talked about earlier in this meeting. There's no reason it can't make it into the final through that process.
So I guess what I'm charging or asking of you guys is to cross-reference this list with our project list, our FMXs, to make sure if there's one that is not, if one of these comments does not have an FMX, whether it's a study or project, that we identify them to create some kind of project/study.
And that also buys you time if you do it during the public comment process in August, September, to do a more detailed analysis rather than trying to jam it in the next 17 days.
Or worst case condition in during the amendment process, which would happen next time. So
Yes, that's what we're proposing.
you're going to take on that challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. Okay.
But I'm saying you can do it. I'm saying you can do it in the public comment period this fall and get it into the final. It may say, public comment is this, a study is TBD, and then it buys some more time to get it into July, but at least you're circling back and you can get it into the final. Because it's a public comment per our earlier discussion, so it's okay to amend the draft for that reason.
Agree. Okay. Let's move on to agenda item number 10. Updates from the regional liaisons. Doris is on, Dave is still on, and right.
I'm trying to get to my notes.
We do have
Go ahead.
Doris, we'll go with you. We'll go with you first.
Okay. I did put in the note a comment about when y'all were talking about TxDOT that Region 11 felt like it should be added that, any rural crossings and things should meet the 100-year floodplain. I guess that's an issue. The larger highways are built to higher standards, but people die on rural areas. So Region 11's working through the different tasks to meet the August 1st deadline. And they're meeting a little more frequently. Only a couple of their tasks were completed, and the other tasks range in completeness, but they were probably more than 50% done, and we're moving along at a pretty fast clip too. I guess they were a little ahead of us, but I think we're catching up. And then the FMXs, FMPs, FMAs, S's, and all that were being voted on individually. And they're kind of grouping some of them, like different suggestions were put in, maybe warning systems or that sort of thing. So, September 7th, they'll be in Kerrville. And then I think they meet at 4:30, or they end at 4:30, and then they take public comment at 5:30. And then they're going to meet in Victoria, kind of similar thing later in the month of September. So I think that's all.
Thank you, Doris. Dave, Mr. Mock.
Yes. Yeah, we're all kind of going through the same process right now. They got a meeting July 18th in Tilden at 11:30, and they got some things on the agenda. Is a status update on flood infrastructure financing with Task 9. They're going to consider adoption of the draft new ACES Region 13 regional flood plan with minor updates required to address regional flood planning comment. And of course, HDR knows this, approved submittal of plan by HDR to Water Development Board. So, like I said, we're all kind of going through the same thing, and that's where they are right now.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks for that update. We'll move on to agenda number 11.
We do have Kirby Brown online from Region 10, if you would like to provide an update.
Yes, please. Just a reminder, it is a 3-minute limit per person.
No problem. I'll be under that. Just letting you know that Region 10, the Lower Colorado Lavaca River region, will be meeting Monday to direct consultants to adopt the draft plan and to direct consultants to submit it to Texas Water Development Board. Also on Monday, we'll have an agenda item directing consultants to further evaluate 13 studies to determine which are most ideal studies to perform and develop into projects as part of the new funding Task 12. And we'll have 4 open houses in September to solicit public input on the draft plan. Just wanted to bring y'all up to date.
Thank you for that update. That was great. Thank you. We will now move to, Kendall, any other public comment?
No, sir, none at this time.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda number 12, date and potential agenda items for the next meeting. Right now we have technical committee meeting on Tuesday, and then this planning group meeting July 25th at 1:30. Okay. Moving on to last and final agenda item.
Sir, can we please schedule the September meeting,
Oh.
if not the August meeting?
I thought we were taking August off. Okay, so.
It has been proposed that we take a break for the month of August.
Does that work for you guys if we take a break for August? Yes, I'm getting a big nod as in yes, we want to take a break. People want to go on vacation in August.
I think the committee should take a break and Ron should keep working.
Okay, Ron. So the next full planning meeting would be July 25th at 1:30. We would take the month of August off. It's too hot. August is just too hot. So we're just gonna, good point. So we will return in September. Kendall, do you have a proposed date on when in September? No proposed date. Can I hear a recommendation on a date in September that works? Earlier, the early part of September? Ron, any ideas, any thoughts, anything that would help you in September?
But by the time September rolls around, we're not going to have any comments back from the Water Development Board. We will have had a couple of the public outreach meetings.
So maybe you shoot for mid to late September?
I would think, because I don't,
In our September meeting, if we were planning on doing that in conjunction basically with our public comment meeting, and don't you want that closer in September so you have time to look at those comments? All three of them?
we're due in January, so the finals due in
Yeah,
January.
so we have some time. So
We
let's,
won't have received the Water Development
let's
Board
look at a day in the middle of September, preferably a Thursday afternoon. What's a good Thursday afternoon that works for everybody? The 15th?
And Kara, that's September 1st or August 1st. 30 days is September 1st, and we have another 30 days where we can. So we will be accepting comments all the way till the end of September. Right?
Okay,
we have to have it open for 30 days. So, but yeah,
let's pencil in the 15th of September at 1:30, please. Sharing family pictures. No, we do have some information. We're going to be talking about any public comment that we will have received, as well as I thought there was something else on the agenda.
Well, and maybe that's a shorter meeting time so that almost, but the public comment meeting we're trying to do in the evening, is that correct? So if we met at 1:30, that meeting won't be till 5:30.
6. Sorry, most of them are at 6 or 6:30.
Yeah.
In the outreach committee, it was proposed that the planning group meeting happen at 3 o'clock so that at 5 o'clock we could have the public meeting.
As long as we don't have a quorum at the public.
I
kick some people out.
I wouldn't worry about it. I think set the meeting, and then we'll work around it with the
Okay,
outreach.
well, let's set it up for
Jim-
2
Jim-
o'clock. Let's set it up for 2 o'clock on the 15th. On September 15th, we'll have agenda items to discuss, including some of the things that are outstanding. Okay.
I'm just trying to figure out which people are going to kind of stay until 6 to do that.
All right, so now that we've talked about item number 12 and have set a meeting for September, let's go on to item 13. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
That's quick. Thank you. Thank you all. I went over 15 minutes. Dang it.
Bye,
I'll do better
everybody.
next time.